I am Julian, 32 years old. For 2 brutal, agonizing years, I watched my manipulative stepmother and her arrogant son systematically destroy my father's life and ruthlessly drain his real estate while he was dying of terminal cancer. While I was desperately trying to save him and protect our family's legacy, my stepmother looked me dead in the eye in the sterile hallway of the hospital and said, "You are officially out of the will, you ungrateful brat." They laughed at me in front of the entire lawyer's office during the reading of the estate, humiliating me publicly. But there was one massive thing they did not know. My father and I had already set an ironclad legal trap 15 months prior, involving an untouchable trust fund and a top-tier private investigator. And right now, those same people who laughed in my face are practically begging on the streets for a single dollar. Before I tell you exactly how it all went down, hit that like button if you believe in absolute justice. And do not forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments section. Now, let us go back to where it all started. The law offices of Caldwell and Associates smelled exactly the way you would expect an old-money, high-stakes legal firm to smell. It was a heavy, intimidating mixture of lemon-wood polish, aged leather-bound books, and the quiet, suffocating scent of dark secrets that wealthy families pay thousands of dollars an hour to keep permanently buried. The central air conditioning was humming a low, steady drone in the background, but it did absolutely nothing to cool the boiling, suffocating tension inside the private waiting room. I sat alone in the far corner, sinking into a dark green leather chair, keeping my eyes fixed intensely on the intricate, woven pattern of the expensive Persian rug beneath my feet. Directly across from me sat the people who had made the last 2 years of my life a waking nightmare. My stepmother, Cassandra, was holding court as if she were a queen surveying her newly conquered kingdom. She was dressed in a meticulously tailored, designer black morning suit that probably cost more than my entire annual salary as a high school history teacher. Her posture was rigidly perfect, her makeup flawless. It was a highly practiced performance of a grieving widow, yet it was entirely undermined by the predatory, greedy gleam shining in her cold eyes. Sitting to her right was Felix, her 28-year-old son. He was the classic golden child, a man who had never worked a hard day in his entire life but felt entitled to the world. He was slouching disrespectfully in an antique armchair, aggressively scrolling through his phone with a massive, arrogant smirk plastered across his face. He did not even have the basic human decency to wear a tie to the legal reading of the man who had supposedly been a loving father figure to him for the past 2 years. "First thing I am doing is buying that Porsche 911 GT3, Felix announced, not bothering to lower his voice, wanting to make sure I heard every single word. "The cherry red one we saw at the luxury dealership in Beverly Hills last weekend. I already talked to the elite finance guy over there. As soon as the inheritance clears the bank, I am cutting a straight cash check. No financing, no monthly payments. I want the physical title in my hand by Friday afternoon, and I want it parked in the main driveway." Cassandra reached over and patted his knee with a perfectly manicured hand. Her nails were painted a sharp, glossy red. "Patience, sweetheart. We have to get through these tedious legalities first. We need the lawyer to finalize the paperwork. But yes, you completely deserve it after everything we have been through caring for that man." Sitting on the other side of Cassandra was Roland. They referred to him as an uncle, a longtime family friend, and a supposedly brilliant financial advisor. Conveniently, he had moved into my father's guest house shortly after the rushed wedding. Roland smugly adjusted his heavy gold watch, leaning in closely to whisper something into Cassandra's ear. She let out a soft, conspiratorial laugh, brushing her hand against his arm in a way that made my stomach turn. It took every single ounce of self-control I possessed not to walk across that Persian rug, grab them by their expensive collars, and throw all 3 of them out the 4th-floor window. They were casually discussing my father's hard-earned money, the massive real estate portfolio he had spent 40 grueling years building from the ground up, working late nights and weekends. They were talking about the college funds he had established for future grandchildren, the heavily funded retirement accounts, the prime commercial properties downtown. They were dividing his life's work like hungry scavengers picking over a fresh carcass, and the dirt on his grave was not even fully settled yet. Cassandra finally turned her sharp gaze toward me. Her eyes were completely devoid of any warmth or basic empathy. "I do not even know why you bothered showing up today, Julian." Harrison made his final wishes very, very clear before he passed away. He knew exactly who was taking care of him during his darkest hours, and who was far too busy playing high school teacher to bother visiting his own dying father. I did not take the bait. I simply looked at my watch, remaining entirely silent, letting her words hang in the empty air. My fiancée, Penelope, had warned me before I left our small apartment that morning. She had held my face gently in her hands, looked deep into my eyes, and told me to stay grounded, to remember the ultimate goal. I remembered her calming words, focusing deeply on my breathing, refusing to give Cassandra the explosive reaction she was so desperately trying to provoke. The heavy, solid oak door to the inner office finally clicked open, and Mr. Jonathan Caldwell stepped out into the waiting room. He was a tall, incredibly imposing man in his late 60s, possessing silver hair and a stern demeanor that usually commanded absolute respect from everyone in the room. He had been my father's primary lawyer and closest personal confidant for over 30 years. They had built their careers together. "Cassandra, Felix, Roland, Julian," Mr. Caldwell said, nodding respectfully to each of us in turn. "Please, step into the main conference room. We have a substantial amount of ground to cover this morning." We filed silently into the expansive, sunlit room. A massive, polished oak table dominated the center of the space. Cassandra immediately marched to the seat at the very head of the table, a clear and calculated power play, while Roland and Felix quickly flanked her on either side like loyal bodyguards. I walked to the opposite end and took a seat near the large window, positioning myself as far away from their toxic energy as physically possible. Mr. Caldwell sat directly opposite Cassandra, opening a remarkably thick manila folder. He slowly adjusted his reading glasses, looking over the documents. "Let me begin by expressing my deepest and most sincere condolences to all of you. Harrison was a truly extraordinary man, a brilliant business mind, and a very dear friend to me. Today, we are gathered here strictly to execute his final will and testament, which was updated and finalized approximately 14 months ago." Yes, thank you, Mr. Caldwell," Cassandra interrupted abruptly, her tone dripping with fake, sugary politeness that barely masked her raging impatience. "It has been an absolutely devastating and exhausting time for our family, but we must be practical now. Harrison and I spent a great deal of time discussing the estate planning right after his tragic cancer diagnosis. He wanted to ensure that the people who were truly there for him, the ones who sacrificed their lives to nurse him, were fully protected." She shot a venomous, triumphant glare down the length of the table in my direction before turning her attention back to the lawyer. "Honestly, you can just skip all the boring legal formalities. I know exactly what the document says. Every single asset goes to me and Felix, as the immediate and loyal family. And as for Julian," she paused deliberately, savoring the cruel moment, letting the heavy silence stretch so her next words would hit with maximum destructive force. "He gets absolutely nothing. I made absolutely sure of it. I told Harrison repeatedly that an ungrateful son who barely bothered to show up for a simple Thanksgiving dinner did not deserve a single dime of this massive inheritance. He is completely cut out. Not a single penny, not a piece of real estate, nothing." Felix chuckled loudly, leaning far back in his chair and crossing his arms behind his head, looking at me like I was garbage on the street. Roland nodded in solemn agreement, trying his best to look dignified and professional. I just sat there, breathing steadily, my hands folded neatly in my lap. Mr. Caldwell looked down at the official documents in front of him. Then he slowly looked up at Cassandra. He blinked once, twice, and then something absolutely incredible happened. The highly distinguished, notoriously stoic lawyer started laughing. It was not a polite, restrained chuckle. It was a deep, rumbling, full-bellied laugh that violently echoed off the mahogany walls. He actually had to take off his expensive reading glasses and wipe a genuine tear of mirth from his eye. Cassandra's smug, victorious expression instantly shattered into a million pieces. Her face turned a bright, furious shade of red. "Excuse me? What on earth is so incredibly funny? Is this how you conduct a professional legal proceeding at this firm?" "I sincerely apologize, Cassandra," Mr. Caldwell said, though his voice was still audibly shaking with suppressed amusement. "It is highly unprofessional of me. Truly it is. But you just confidently stated that you made sure Julian was completely cut out of the will. And you see, to understand exactly why that statement is the most hilariously misguided thing I have heard in my entire 40-year career in law, we desperately need to talk about the concept of a revocable living trust." Cassandra's jaw tightened visibly, her eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. "I know perfectly well what a trust fund is. Harrison legally revoked it when we got married to protect my future." Mr. Caldwell smiled, a sharp, incredibly dangerous smile that reminded me so vividly of my father when he was about to close a massive, hostile corporate takeover. To understand exactly why the most powerful man in this room was currently laughing directly in my stepmother's face, we have to go back 2 agonizing years. Back to when this horrible nightmare truly began, and the foundation of my family was ripped apart. 2 years ago, my entire world aggressively cracked open and fell apart. My beautiful mother, the absolute anchor of our family and the kindest soul I ever knew, passed away incredibly suddenly from an undetected brain aneurysm. The shocking loss completely devastated my father, Harrison. He was a notoriously strong, fiercely pragmatic businessman who had built an absolute empire in commercial real estate, but losing his devoted wife of 35 years broke him in ways I simply could not comprehend. The light completely left his eyes. He stopped going into the corporate office. He stopped attending his weekly golf games with his friends. He just sat alone in his massive, dimly lit study for hours on end, staring blankly at the walls, completely consumed by an ocean of grief. I tried desperately to be there for him. I really did. I drove out to the sprawling estate every single day after finishing teaching my history classes, bringing him hot dinners, trying to get him to talk, trying to force him to take a walk in the fresh air. But profound grief makes people incredibly vulnerable, and extreme vulnerability is a blinding beacon for ruthless predators. Enter Cassandra. She was a high-end interior designer he had hired on a strange whim to remodel my mother's beloved garden. It was a desperate, misguided attempt to change his surroundings and erase the painful memories. Cassandra was in her early 50s, highly charming, aggressively attentive, and heavily armed with a compelling sob story about her own difficult, abusive divorce that left her with nothing. She knew exactly how to play the victim while simultaneously playing the savior. Before I even fully realized what was happening, she had completely and totally embedded herself in every single aspect of his daily life. Within a shocking 6 months of my mother's funeral, they were married at a sterile local courthouse. No family was invited, no big ceremony was held. Just a quick signature on a piece of paper that changed everything forever. I was completely blindsided by the news. I clearly remember sitting in his study the day he told me, looking at the official marriage certificate resting on his desk, feeling physically sick to my stomach. "Dad, do you not think this is a little fast? Mom barely just passed," I had asked gently, trying not to sound accusatory. He just looked away, his eyes vacant and tired. "I am incredibly lonely, Julian. She makes this massive house feel a little less empty. I need the company." I could not bring myself to argue with his overwhelming grief. I just wanted him to find some shred of happiness. But the aggressive changes started immediately, and they were utterly ruthless. First, Cassandra moved her spoiled son, Felix, into the main house without asking anyone. Felix was a classic failure to launch. 26 years old at the time, chronically unemployed, constantly talking loudly about cryptocurrency investments that never ever materialized, and driving a luxury car he absolutely could not afford on his own. He treated the estate like his personal resort. Then came the introduction of Roland. Cassandra confidently introduced him to my father as a dear old friend and a highly successful financial consultant. She somehow convinced my vulnerable father to let Roland live completely rent-free in the sprawling guest house, so he could help manage the local properties and save the family money on management fees. I immediately ran a deep background check on Roland through a close buddy of mine who worked in law enforcement. It quickly turned out Roland's real estate license had been permanently suspended in Nevada a decade ago for gross financial misconduct. I printed the documents and brought this damning information directly to my father. But Cassandra somehow intercepted the conversation. She burst into the room, crying hysterically, violently accusing me of trying to sabotage her new family because I was selfishly guarding my inheritance. My father, exhausted, medicated, and just wanting peace in his home, told me to drop the issue entirely. Next, the loyal staff was systematically purged. The elderly gardener who had lovingly tended to my mother's roses for 20 years, fired without severance. The family chef, gone the next day. The only person who miraculously survived the brutal purge was Beatrice, our head housekeeper who had basically helped raise me since I was a child. Cassandra desperately tried to fire her on multiple occasions, but my father put his foot firmly down. It was the only time I saw him actually stand up to her in those early, confusing months. Then the true nightmare really started. My father got sick. It started as extreme fatigue, then evolved into a persistent, hacking cough. The official diagnosis was stage 3 lung cancer. The exact moment the oncologist uttered the terrifying word cancer, Cassandra's entire demeanor drastically shifted. The attentive, loving, doting wife act was instantly replaced by the hyper-controlling, aggressive warden. She immediately took total control over his complex medical care, forcefully and legally positioning herself as his sole primary healthcare proxy. That was when the brutal isolation campaign began. Whenever I called the house phone, Cassandra always answered. "He is sleeping deeply, Julian. The heavy chemo is taking a massive toll on him. He is absolutely not up for visitors today, Julian. His immune system is too weak. You really should not come by this weekend, Julian. He needs absolute, uninterrupted quiet to heal." She began whispering lies to my father. She told him that I was far too busy with my teaching job, that I strongly preferred spending all my free time with Penelope, that I was intentionally ignoring him because I could not handle seeing him weak. She weaponized my own busy life against me, creating a massive wedge between us. One stressful afternoon, I desperately needed to pay a medical supply company for a highly specialized hospital bed I had ordered for him because he was uncomfortable. I went to use the secondary credit card linked directly to his main account, a card I had held for emergency family expenses for over a decade. The transaction was instantly declined. I drove straight to the bank and aggressively demanded to speak with Thorne, the senior branch manager who had personally managed our family accounts for years. Thorne would not even look me in the eye. He sat nervously behind his polished mahogany desk, shifting uncomfortably in his expensive chair. "I am incredibly sorry, Julian." Cassandra came in yesterday afternoon with a fully executed, ironclad power of attorney document. She specifically instructed us to freeze all of your secondary cards and immediately remove your access to the main ledger. She firmly stated you had been making large, unauthorized purchases. "Unauthorized," I yelled, slamming my hand violently on his desk. "I am trying to buy him a basic medical bed because she flat out refuses to pay for it out of the household account. Thorne, you have known my family since I was a little kid. You know she is lying. My hands are completely tied legally," Thorne mumbled, nervously adjusting his silk tie. "She is his legal wife. She is running the finances now. If I bypass her, I lose my job and face a massive lawsuit." I left the bank shaking violently with rage. I drove straight to the estate. I did not care about the new rules or the changed gate codes. I jumped the small side fence, parked my car on the street, and marched right up to the heavy front door. I let myself in using my old, hidden spare key. The massive house was dead quiet. I walked swiftly toward my father's study, fully intending to confront her and demand answers. The heavy oak door was slightly ajar. I stopped dead in my tracks, holding my breath. Inside the dimly lit study, Cassandra was standing right by my father's desk. Roland was standing directly behind her. He had his arms wrapped tightly around her waist, his chin resting intimately on her shoulder. They were looking intently at a complex financial spreadsheet glowing on the computer monitor. If we rapidly liquidate the commercial property in downtown Seattle, Roland was whispering, his voice low, greedy, and incredibly intimate. We can easily funnel the cash directly into the offshore LLC before the old man even notices it is missing. His pain medication has him so foggy today, he can barely sign his own name on the checks. Cassandra leaned back against him, sighing deeply. Just make absolutely sure the legal paperwork is completely airtight. I am not playing the miserable role of nursemaid to a dying, pathetic man just to walk away with a measly half of this estate in a messy divorce. I want it all. I want his precious son Julian entirely out of the picture for good. My blood ran freezing cold. The sheer, unadulterated audacity. The horrifying betrayal. This was not just a simple gold digger trying to secure a bag. This was a highly coordinated, systematic dismantling of my family's legacy by two ruthless grifters who were clearly sleeping together right under my dying father's roof. I pulled out my phone and quietly, with trembling hands, snapped a picture through the crack in the door. My hands were shaking so hard the image was slightly blurred, but it was clear enough to show them embracing intimately. I did not storm in. I did not scream, because in that terrifying moment, a chilling, deeply logical realization hit me. If I confronted them right now, with absolutely zero legal power and my father heavily medicated and isolated, they would easily spin it. They would claim I was a paranoid, jealous, greedy son making up lies. They would accelerate their malicious plans and probably ban me from the property permanently. I backed away silently and slipped out of the house unnoticed. I sat in my car parked on the street for a long time, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned pure white. My own mother's legacy was being stolen. My father was being held hostage in his own home. I needed a flawless plan, and I needed powerful allies. The horrible situation escalated violently just 2 weeks later. I was sitting in my small apartment, exhausted, grading a stack of history papers, when Penelope walked into the living room, holding her phone with a deeply disgusted look on her beautiful face. "You really need to see this," she said softly, handing me the glowing screen. It was Felix's public Instagram page. He was leaning casually against a brand new, matte black Lamborghini Urus. The caption read, "Blessings on blessings. Hard work finally pays off. Hashtag new whip, hashtag generational wealth, hashtag self-made." I stared at the screen, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. A Lamborghini Urus. That was $250,000 minimum. Felix had never worked a legitimate day in his miserable life. The only possible place that massive amount of money could have come from was my father's investment accounts. I aggressively grabbed my jacket, kissed Penelope on the forehead, and drove straight to my close friend Marcus's apartment complex. Marcus was a buddy from college who currently worked as a junior analyst at a prominent accounting firm. I had deeply confided in him about everything going on, even giving him some of the account routing numbers I had memorized to see if he could quietly track any massive, unusual withdrawals on the public banking ledger. When Marcus opened his front door, he looked incredibly jumpy and nervous. The small apartment smelled strongly like stale beer and cheap weed. "Julian. Hey man, what is up?" He stuttered awkwardly, physically blocking the doorway with his body. "Felix just bought a Lamborghini?" I said coldly, pushing forcefully past him into the messy living room. "I need you to look at the system right now and tell me if a massive wire transfer cleared from the main holding account this morning." Marcus rubbed the back of his neck aggressively, completely avoiding my intense gaze. "Look, Julian, I told you last week I cannot keep looking into that stuff without a legal warrant. The firm tracks our searches. I could lose my job." I suddenly noticed a brand new, massive 85-inch OLED TV sitting proudly in his living room, still with the clear protective film peeling off the bezels. Next to it was a brand new, high-end gaming PC rig that cost thousands. Marcus had been bitterly complaining about being completely broke and drowning in heavy student loans just a week ago. I slowly turned to look at him, the pieces clicking together in my mind. Where exactly did you get the money for that TV, Marcus? He swallowed hard, sweat forming on his brow. I got a surprise performance bonus at work. Bullshit. I stepped closer, aggressively closing the distance between us until I was entirely in his personal space. You explicitly told me your firm froze all bonuses this quarter due to budget cuts. Marcus, look me dead in the eye and tell me you did not sell me out to that parasite. He backed up until he hit the wall, his fake bravado completely crumbling. Man, please, I did not have a choice. My aggressive bookie was threatening to physically break my legs over a massive sports betting debt I couldn't cover. Felix reached out to me on social media. He said he knew we were talking. He offered me 10 grand in cold, hard cash just to tell him exactly what days you were busy teaching, and to let him know if you were aggressively sniffing around the bank accounts. He just needed to know when the coast was perfectly clear to execute the wire transfers without you showing up at the bank branch to cause a massive scene. My best friend, a guy I had known for 10 solid years, who had eaten warm Thanksgiving dinner at my father's table, laughing and sharing stories. He had selfishly sold my dying father's security for a television and to cover a degenerate gambling debt. You absolutely make me sick, I whispered, the harsh betrayal tasting like foul ash in my mouth. I did not yell. I did not hit him. I just turned around and walked out, completely ignoring his pathetic, desperate apologies echoing loudly down the dirty hallway. The circle was tightening rapidly. I had absolutely no access to the bank. My friends were compromised. My father was locked away under heavy guard. That night, at exactly midnight, I received a cryptic text message from an unknown number. Come to the service entrance at 2 a.m. Do not park in the driveway. Clara. Clara was the highly expensive private hospice nurse Cassandra had hired to monitor my father. I had met her only once, a quiet, deeply observant woman in her 40s who always seemed terrified of crossing Cassandra. At exactly 2 a.m., I parked 2 blocks away in the shadows and walked through the dark, damp suburban streets to the estate. The heavy iron gate to the service entrance was surprisingly unlocked. I slipped silently through the sprawling garden, the faint, tragic scent of my mother's dying rose bushes filling the cold night air. Clara was waiting anxiously by the back kitchen door, holding a small flashlight. She motioned frantically for me to stay completely quiet and led me up the steep back staircase, carefully avoiding the creaky wooden steps. Cassandra and Roland went out to a lavish charity gala downtown, Clara whispered, her breath visible in the chilly hallway. They will not be back until very late. Felix is passed out drunk in his room with loud music playing. You have exactly 20 minutes. She gently opened the heavy door to my father's master suite. The massive room was extremely dark, smelling strongly of sharp antiseptic and impending death. The expensive medical machines hummed softly in the background. I walked slowly over to the large bed. My father looked incredibly frail, his skin pale and translucent, his once strong cheekbones sharp and hollow. The devastating sight of him broke my heart all over again. Dad? I whispered, kneeling down closely by the side of the bed. His eyes fluttered open. For the first time in what felt like months, they were not clouded with extreme confusion or heavy narcotics. They were sharp, intensely focused, and piercingly clear. Julian. His voice was raspy, incredibly weak, but steady. I am here, Dad. I am going to get you out of this nightmare. I am calling a ruthless lawyer. I am calling the police tomorrow. I know everything about Roland and Cassandra. I know Felix is stealing your money to buy cars. My father slowly reached out from under the heavy blankets and grabbed my wrist. His grip was surprisingly, shockingly strong. Absolutely no police, he commanded, his voice dropping to a harsh, serious whisper. If you foolishly call the police now, they will immediately claim I have severe dementia. They already have Thorne in their pocket at the bank. They have fake medical records ready to be instantly signed by a corrupt Dr. Roland knows. They will easily tie you up in a massive, expensive lawsuit for a decade, and by the time you finally win, the money will be completely hidden in untraceable offshore accounts. Then what on earth do we do? I pleaded, hot tears violently stinging my eyes. They are literally killing you, Dad. I am already dying, Julian, he said flatly, accepting his grim fate with a terrifying, cold calmness. The cancer is spreading rapidly to my bones. We do not have time for a long, drawn-out legal war. We need an absolute slaughter. With a severely trembling hand, he reached slowly under his pillow and pulled out a small, heavy brass key. He pressed it firmly into my palm, folding my fingers tightly over it. This key is for the secure safety deposit box at the downtown branch of Liberty Trust, not our usual bank. I secretly opened it 30 years ago. Inside is an encrypted hard drive and a sealed envelope of instructions. You need to take this directly to Jonathan Caldwell. Only Caldwell. He knows exactly what to do. I looked down at the key, feeling the cold, heavy metal pressing against my skin. Listen to me very carefully, son, my father continued, his breathing becoming labored. Cassandra truly thinks she is playing a masterful, flawless game. She thinks I am a senile, pathetic old fool who cannot read a basic ledger anymore. But I have known the truth about Roland since the very day he moved in. I hired a top-tier private investigator a year ago. My jaw dropped open in shock. You knew. I built a massive empire from absolutely nothing in a city completely full of ruthless sharks. Julian. You do not survive that long at the top by being blind to the snakes in your own grass. He coughed, a terrible, wet, rattling sound. Clara quickly stepped in from the shadows, gently wiping his mouth with a clean towel. You have to play the part, Julian, my father insisted, his intense eyes locking fiercely onto mine. You have to play the broken, defeated, entirely desperate son. Let them confidently think they have won the war. Let them spend the money. Let them get comfortable, lazy, and arrogant. Arrogance is exactly how they will hang themselves. Dad, I cannot just stand by and watch them abuse you like this. You absolutely must, he ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. For your mother's legacy. For your future family. Trust me, Julian. The trap is already firmly set. We just have to painfully wait for the steel jaws to snap shut. I squeezed his frail hand, the tears finally falling freely down my face. I love you, Dad. I love you too, son. Now get out of here right now before she comes back and ruins everything. And Julian, I stopped at the heavy bedroom door, looking back at the frail, dying genius lying in the bed. When the time finally comes, he whispered, a dark, incredibly vengeful smile crossing his pale face. Show them absolutely no mercy. The very next morning, skipping my first period class, I went straight to the Liberty Trust Bank in the heart of downtown Seattle. Using the heavy brass key my father had given me, I opened the old, dusty safety deposit box. Inside, exactly just as he said, was a highly encrypted external hard drive and a thick, sealed envelope addressed in his familiar handwriting to Jonathan Caldwell. I immediately called Mr. Caldwell's private, unlisted cell phone number. We met not at his flashy, highly visible law office, but at a discreet, run-down diner on the extreme outskirts of town. Penelope came with me, sitting quietly and supportively by my side, her hand resting firmly on my knee to keep me grounded. When Caldwell plugged the encrypted hard drive into his secure laptop and typed in the password provided in the letter, his bushy eyebrows shot straight up in sheer disbelief. My God in heaven, the seasoned lawyer murmured, rapidly clicking through the massive folders of files. Harrison was not just building a legal case. He was meticulously building a financial guillotine. The drive contained hundreds of high-definition surveillance photos taken by a highly skilled private investigator named Reed. There were crystal-clear photos of Cassandra and Roland kissing passionately in public parking lots. There were complex offshore bank routing numbers Roland had previously used to funnel illegal money from his past real estate scams in Nevada. But the absolute most damning piece of evidence was a meticulously maintained digital ledger my father had kept himself, documenting every single time Cassandra had intentionally and maliciously mixed up his medications to induce severe cognitive fog so she could get him to sign documents. Is this enough concrete evidence to arrest them today? I asked, my voice tight with suppressed rage. Arrest them? Yes, absolutely, Caldwell said, aggressively adjusting his glasses. But your father explicitly stated in his letter that he did not just want them sitting comfortably in a jail cell. He wanted them completely, utterly financially ruined. He wanted them to feel the exact same helplessness and despair they cruelly forced upon him. The major problem is, Cassandra currently has a completely legal power of attorney right now. If we strike today, she could still rapidly liquidate millions in assets before a judge issues an injunction. So what is the actual plan? Penelope asked, leaning forward. Caldwell smiled a grim, terrifying smile. We quietly execute the irrevocable trust protocol. But to do that smoothly, Julian, you need to put on the absolute performance of a lifetime. You need to make Cassandra truly, deeply believe she has utterly and permanently destroyed you. So I did exactly that. I became the miserable loser they so desperately wanted me to be. Over the next 2 grueling months, as my father's physical condition rapidly deteriorated towards the end, I played my humiliating part perfectly. I showed up at the estate looking completely disheveled, wearing wrinkled clothes, and acting entirely desperate. I literally got on my knees and begged Cassandra for money in the grand driveway, in full view of Roland and Felix who were drinking champagne on the porch. Please, Cassandra, I had cried, forcing my voice to crack convincingly. My car completely broke down. I cannot afford the rent on my apartment this month. Just let me go inside and talk to him. Just give me a small advance on my inheritance so I can survive. Cassandra had laughed directly in my face. She stood proudly on the marble steps of the house my mother had lovingly decorated, looking down at me like I was a disgusting insect. You have absolutely no inheritance, Julian, she sneered, sipping her drink. Harrison formally updated his will last month. You are entirely out. If you desperately want money, maybe you should have picked a better career than teaching boring history to ungrateful teenagers. Get off my property right now before I call the local police and have you arrested for trespassing. Felix was standing right behind her, cruelly recording the whole humiliating interaction on his expensive phone for social media. Hold this massive L, bro, he laughed loudly, aggressively waving the keys to his new Lamborghini. I slowly walked away, hanging my head in mock defeat. But the second I was safely inside my car, completely out of their sight, my expression went dead flat and ice cold. I pulled out my phone and texted Caldwell. Phase 1 is complete. They bought it hook, line, and sinker. Behind the scenes, the real devastating work was happening. Caldwell quietly brought in Dr. Eris, a highly respected, heavily credentialed forensic psychiatrist. Under the clever guise of a routine life insurance checkup arranged entirely by Clara the nurse, Dr. Eris slipped secretly into the estate and conducted a full, exhaustive cognitive evaluation of my father. He legally recorded my father answering highly complex financial and logical questions perfectly, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt in a court of law that Harrison was of incredibly sound mind, rendering any future argument Cassandra might try to make about dementia completely null and void. Then came the final, most dangerous piece of the puzzle. Beatrice, our fiercely loyal housekeeper. One rainy evening, Beatrice met Penelope and me at a dark grocery store parking lot. She was physically trembling, looking terrified over her shoulder constantly. She is going to literally kill me if she finds out I am here, Beatrice whispered, quickly handing me a small plastic Ziploc bag. Inside were 3 distinct, brightly colored pills. What exactly are these, Beatrice? I asked gently, trying to calm her down. Cassandra personally handles his afternoon medication, Beatrice explained, her voice shaking uncontrollably. She repeatedly told me they were just strong painkillers. But yesterday, she accidentally dropped one on the kitchen floor and couldn't find it. I found it sweeping later. I took it to my personal pharmacy to ask what it was. Julian, it is not a painkiller at all. It is a high-grade, highly illegal antipsychotic meant for severe schizophrenia. She has been actively tranquilizing him to steal the money. I gripped the steering wheel, a cold, calculated fury washing entirely over me. Thank you, Beatrice. You did the absolutely right thing. I promise you on my life, you will be fully protected when this all blows up. I immediately handed the pills over to Detective Reed, the private investigator Caldwell had retained, to firmly establish the legal chain of custody for a massive criminal tampering charge. We were completely ready. Every single piece was perfectly in place on the chessboard. We just had to endure the pain and wait for the king to eventually fall. 2 long, agonizing weeks later, my father passed away peacefully in his sleep. The funeral was an absolutely grotesque circus of sickening hypocrisy. Cassandra bought a custom-made, obscenely expensive black veil and sobbed loudly and dramatically into a lace handkerchief the entire service, making sure everyone saw her grief. Roland stood firmly beside her, acting as a pillar of fake strength, occasionally placing a comforting hand on the small of her back, a gesture that looked entirely supportive to the clueless crowd, but I knew exactly what it really meant. Felix spent the entire solemn wake at the country club, taking selfish selfies near the open bar, loudly bragging to my father's grieving business associates about his new upcoming role as the wealthy head of the family. I sat quietly in the very back row, wearing a simple, inexpensive dark suit. People looked at me with deep pity. They whispered constantly about the estranged son, the massive failure, the boy who was entirely cut out of the massive fortune. I let them whisper. As the beautiful wooden casket was finally lowered into the ground, Cassandra walked confidently over to me. She pulled back her expensive veil, her eyes completely dry, cold, and incredibly triumphant. "It is finally over, Julian," she whispered venomously, ensuring no one else around us could hear. "Pack your cheap bags and stay far away from the official reading of the will next week. It will only embarrass you further when everyone sees you get nothing." I looked at her, thinking deeply about the heavy brass key, the encrypted hard drive, the antipsychotic pills, and the massive trust fund that had been quietly ticking like a nuclear time bomb for 29 years. "We will see, Cassandra," I replied smoothly, offering her a cold, empty smile. "We will definitely see." And that is exactly how we ended up right back in Mr. Caldwell's prestigious office, sitting across that massive mahogany table, watching the lawyer laugh directly in her face. The deep, rumbling echo of Mr. Jonathan Caldwell's laughter hung heavily in the suffocating, climate-controlled air of the massive mahogany conference room. It was absolutely not a sound that Cassandra had ever expected to hear in her entire privileged life, let alone in a high-stakes, deeply serious legal setting where she believed she held all the winning cards. She was entirely accustomed to weak men bowing to her ridiculous demands, shrinking under her icy, calculating glares, or simply giving in to her will just to avoid a massive, dramatic public confrontation. But Jonathan Caldwell was cut from the exact same ruthless, old-school, unapologetic cloth as my father. He did not flinch. He did not back down. He did not offer a single word of apology. He just casually reached up, wiped a stray tear of pure, unadulterated mirth from his wrinkled eye, placed his expensive gold-rimmed reading glasses firmly back onto the bridge of his nose, and looked at my stepmother with a complex mixture of absolute pity and profound, undeniable amusement. Cassandra slammed both of her perfectly manicured hands flat onto the polished oak table. The sharp, cracking sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room, making Felix physically jump out of his oversized leather seat, dropping his phone onto the table. Her face was flushed with a deep, furious crimson red that clashed terribly with her highly expensive, custom-tailored black morning suit. "I demand to know what is so incredibly funny, Jonathan," Cassandra hissed, her voice vibrating with a toxic, unadulterated rage that she could barely contain. "My husband just died a slow, agonizing, painful death. We are gathered here today in this office to read his final, legally binding will, which clearly and undeniably leaves his entire real estate portfolio, all of his liquid cash assets, his offshore holding companies, and his massive retirement accounts directly to me. I am his devoted, loving wife. I bathed him. I fed him. I earned every single penny of this estate. I strongly suggest you stop playing these childish games, do your highly paid job, and execute the proper legal documents right this second. If you refuse, I will personally ensure you are reported to the State Bar Association for gross professional misconduct. I will ruin this firm, and I will ruin your entire legacy." Roland leaned forward immediately, aggressively trying to project the fake, domineering authority he always wore like a cheap, ill-fitting polyester suit. He wanted to look like the alpha male in the room, but he just looked like a desperate con artist cornered in an alley. "Cassandra is entirely correct, Mr. Caldwell," Roland stated, puffing out his chest. "As her primary, legally appointed financial advisor, I have thoroughly and meticulously reviewed the standard legal protocols for spousal inheritance in this specific state. The updated will from exactly 14 months ago completely and legally supersedes any previous documents, promises, or outdated trusts. Julian is legally and permanently disinherited by his own father's hand. We are fully prepared to file a massive multimillion-dollar civil lawsuit against you, your partners, and this entire law firm if you attempt to illegally delay the immediate distribution of these funds to my client. Do not test us. We have the law on our side." I sat completely silent by the large floor-to-ceiling window, letting the warm afternoon sunlight hit the side of my face. I watched closely as a small, cold bead of sweat formed on Roland's forehead, slowly trailing down his temple and soaking into his collar. He was desperately trying to sound intimidating, confidently throwing around complex legal buzzwords he barely understood, but he was completely out of his depth. He was a small-time, pathetic grifter desperately trying to play in the major corporate leagues, and it was embarrassing to watch. Mr. Caldwell did not even bother to look in Roland's direction. He treated the man like an annoying, insignificant insect buzzing against a thick windshield. He kept his piercing, highly intelligent gray eyes entirely locked on Cassandra. He calmly and methodically opened the incredibly thick, heavily sealed manila folder resting on the table directly in front of him. "Cassandra," Mr. Caldwell began, his voice suddenly dropping an entire octave, completely losing all remaining traces of humor and instantly replacing it with cold, hard, undeniable legal reality. "You are entirely correct about one specific minor detail today. Harrison did indeed formally update his last will and testament exactly 14 months ago in this very office. And in that specific document, he did legally exclude Julian from receiving any traditional inheritance through the standard state probate process. You made absolutely 100% sure of that. You stood menacingly over his hospital bed, isolated him from his loved ones, and bullied a dying, highly vulnerable man into signing a piece of paper just to get you to stop screaming at him." Cassandra sat back slightly in her plush chair, a highly smug, intensely victorious smile creeping slowly back onto her face, completely replacing her previous rage. She looked all the way down the long table at me, her eyes screaming absolute triumph, malicious joy, and complete superiority. "Exactly," Cassandra sneered, her voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. "So cut the massive check right now, Jonathan. My son has a very expensive luxury car to purchase this afternoon. A brand new Lamborghini, if you must know. And I have a broken, shattered life to rebuild after sacrificing my prime years to nurse a dying old man. We are completely done here. Hand over the account routing numbers." "However," Mr. Caldwell continued, raising a single, highly commanding index finger to instantly stop her dead in her tracks, "you clearly do not understand the fundamental, basic legal difference between a standard last will and an irrevocable living trust. You see, Cassandra, a standard will only legally dictates the distribution of assets that a specific person actually personally owns at the exact, precise moment of their physical death. If a man dies owning absolutely nothing to his name, his will is nothing more than a highly expensive, completely worthless piece of paper. It is entirely meaningless in the eyes of the federal government." The smug, victorious smile on Cassandra's face instantly froze, her facial muscles locking in place. Felix stopped tapping his fingers on the table. He looked up, his brow furrowing in deep, genuine confusion, his arrogant facade slowly cracking. "What the hell are you talking about?" Felix demanded loudly, leaning forward aggressively and pointing at the lawyer. The old man was absolutely loaded. He owned the massive gated estate we currently live in. He owned the entire block of commercial office buildings downtown. He owned the massive investment accounts, the college funds, the vintage car collection. We literally just checked the massive bank balances online last week using his passwords. The money is sitting right there in the accounts. Stop stalling and give us our money. No, Felix, Mr. Caldwell corrected sharply, his voice cutting through the tense room like a freshly sharpened butcher's blade. Harrison did not own those things. Not anymore. Not for a very, very long time. Mr. Caldwell reached deep into his heavy leather briefcase and pulled out an incredibly thick, heavy, leather-bound legal document that looked visibly older than I was. He dropped it onto the absolute dead center of the polished oak table with a heavy, deeply satisfying thud that made every single person on the opposite side of the table physically flinch. 29 years ago, very shortly after Julian was born, Harrison and his incredibly brilliant first wife established the Chun Family Irrevocable Trust, Mr. Caldwell explained, tapping the heavy leather binder with his gold pen. It was meticulously designed with one singular goal: to completely and permanently protect their generational wealth from greedy predators, bad corporate investments, and manipulative outsiders. An irrevocable trust is a distinct, completely separate legal entity. Once you put your personal assets into it, you no longer personally own them. The trust itself owns them. And more importantly, you absolutely cannot easily change, alter, or dissolve an irrevocable trust without the direct, legally binding, written consent of the primary beneficiary. I watched closely as Roland's face turned the exact color of dirty chalk. As a former real estate grifter who had spent his entire miserable adult life running illegal scams and reading fine print to steal from people, he instantly knew exactly what that specific legal term meant. Irrevocable. It was the ultimate, impenetrable financial fortress. It meant the money was completely, legally untouchable by anyone outside the designated bloodline. Over the past 3 decades, Mr. Caldwell explained, his voice ringing with absolute, undeniable authority that commanded the room, Harrison meticulously, quietly, and legally transferred every single major asset he ever acquired directly into this trust. The primary, multi-million-dollar estate you are currently sleeping in, legally owned by the trust. The massive commercial real estate portfolio generating millions in annual passive revenue, owned entirely by the trust. The massive corporate investment accounts, the high-yield retirement accounts, the offshore holding companies in Switzerland, all owned entirely and exclusively by the trust. Cassandra shook her head aggressively in pure, unadulterated, desperate denial. Her perfectly styled blonde hair fell wildly into her face, ruining her perfect widow aesthetic. That is a lie. That is a complete and utter fabrication meant to scare us. We updated the will. He explicitly, verbally, and in writing, left everything to me. I am his legal wife. I am absolutely entitled to half of everything he built during our marriage. This state has community property laws. You are his widow, Mr. Caldwell corrected without missing a single beat, his tone completely devoid of emotion. And you are the primary beneficiary of a will that controls absolutely zero financial assets. Because according to the ironclad legal bylaws of the Chin Family Trust, which I personally drafted, finalized, and filed with the federal government 29 years ago, total control and total legal ownership of the entire trust automatically transferred to the sole designated heir upon his 30th birthday. Mr. Caldwell slowly turned his head and looked directly at me. He offered me a small, deeply respectful, highly significant nod. Julian, Mr. Caldwell said clearly, ensuring his deep voice carried to every single dark corner of the room so nobody could possibly miss a single syllable. For the official legal record, how old are you today? I leaned forward in my chair, resting my elbows casually on the mahogany table, steepling my fingers together. I looked directly, intensely into Cassandra's wide, wildly panicked eyes. I wanted her to see the absolute, terrifying lack of mercy in my soul. I wanted her to realize she was drowning. I am 32 years old, Mr. Caldwell, I replied, my voice incredibly steady, deep, and completely terrifyingly calm. Mr. Caldwell turned back to Cassandra, delivering the fatal, crushing, life-destroying blow. Total legal ownership of the $71 million estate legally transferred entirely to Julian exactly 2 years ago. Harrison made absolutely sure the massive financial transition was entirely silent, totally legal, and completely seamless before you even married him. Which means, Cassandra, for the last 2 entire years, you have been sleeping in Julian's house. You have been eating expensive food bought directly with Julian's money. And Felix, that fancy new Lamborghini you are illegally driving was purchased using funds stolen directly from Julian's corporate accounts without his permission, which constitutes massive grand theft. The absolute silence in the room was completely deafening. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating, terrifying silence that occurs right after a massive bomb detonates, in that split second before the dust and debris even begin to settle on the ruined landscape. Felix was the absolute first to physically break. He threw his expensive phone onto the table, completely shattering the screen into 100 tiny pieces of useless glass. This is complete garbage. You are making this up to screw us over. You cannot do this to me. I already told the luxury dealership I am bringing the rest of the cash today. My friends are waiting for me to pick them up for a party. I signed a legally binding purchase agreement for that car. Cassandra violently grabbed Felix by the arm, pulling him down aggressively into his seat. She was breathing heavily, her chest heaving, staring at the leather-bound trust document like it was a highly venomous snake preparing to strike her in the throat. Her mind was racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour, frantically looking for a tiny legal loophole, a secret backdoor, a way out of the massive, inescapable trap she had completely walked right into. She had spent 2 brutal, agonizing years manipulating a dying man, systematically isolating him from his only son, thinking she was the absolute smartest person in the room. She never once suspected that the dying man and his quiet, unassuming son were playing a highly complex game of chess 10 levels above her, waiting patiently for her to make the final, fatal mistake. Fraud! Cassandra suddenly screamed at the absolute top of her lungs, her shrill voice cracking with pure, unadulterated, terrifying desperation. She pointed a violently trembling finger directly at my face, her eyes bulging. This is absolute, undeniable fraud. We will drag you through the Supreme Court for a decade if we have to. Harrison was absolutely not in his right mind when this alleged transfer happened. He had severe, debilitating dementia from the aggressive cancer treatments. He did not know what he was doing when he finalized that paperwork. We have massive, undeniable grounds for a medical malpractice lawsuit to completely invalidate this fake trust. We will freeze every single account you have by tomorrow morning. Roland quickly chimed in, desperately trying to salvage the rapidly sinking ship that was his entire financial future. He stood up abruptly, slamming his sweaty hands flat on the table. She is entirely right, Caldwell. Any competent, breathing judge in this state will completely invalidate this trust transfer immediately upon review. Harrison was heavily, constantly, and severely medicated. We have the daily prescription logs to prove his incompetence. You actively took advantage of a sick, elderly, confused man, Julian. This is textbook, undeniable elder abuse, and you are going to federal prison for a very long time. I did not say a single word. I did not raise my voice. I did not even blink. I just looked calmly at Mr. Caldwell and gave him a slow, subtle, highly calculated nod. It was officially time to drop the absolute heaviest hammer we possessed in our arsenal. I highly anticipated you would make that exact, desperate, highly predictable legal argument, Mr. Caldwell said smoothly, completely unbothered by their loud screaming and hollow threats. He opened a separate, bright red, highly classified file folder and pulled out a massive stack of medical documents bearing the highly recognizable, official gold seal of the most prestigious forensic psychiatric hospital in the state. 14 months ago, completely anticipating your inevitable and highly predictable legal challenges regarding his mental state, Julian and Harrison arranged for a comprehensive, entirely independent cognitive evaluation. This was conducted directly by Dr. Aris, a chief forensic psychiatrist who frequently serves as a highly respected, heavily vetted expert witness for the state Supreme Court. Dr. Aris spent 3 uninterrupted hours alone with Harrison in a secure facility. He administered a grueling, extensive battery of complex psychological, logical, and financial competency tests. Mr. Caldwell slid the thick, legally binding medical report across the polished table until it stopped directly in front of Cassandra's violently trembling hands. Harrison scored absolutely perfectly on every single metric, Mr. Caldwell stated firmly, tapping the heavy cover of the report. The official, legally binding medical conclusion is that Harrison possessed an exceptionally high level of cognitive function, perfect memory recall, and an absolute, crystal-clear understanding of his massive financial estate and all of its implications. He knew exactly what he was doing every single second of the day. Your desperate, pathetic claim of dementia is medically baseless, entirely fraudulent, and legally dead on arrival in any court in this country. Cassandra stared blindly at the thick medical report. Her face was completely drained of all color, turning an incredibly sickly, terrifying shade of gray. She looked like she was going to be physically sick right there on the expensive Persian rug. But we were absolutely not finished. My father had specifically and explicitly instructed me to show absolutely no mercy, and I was going to honor his dying wish to the absolute letter. I wanted them utterly destroyed. Since we are currently on the highly sensitive, incredibly dangerous topic of Harrison's daily medication, Mr. Caldwell continued, his voice turning incredibly sharp and dangerous, slicing through the air like glass breaking in a quiet room. Let us discuss the specific drugs he was actually taking. Or rather, the highly dangerous, illegal drugs you were secretly and maliciously forcing him to take against his will to keep him completely docile. Roland physically flinched, his entire body jerking backward. His wide eyes darted toward the heavy oak door. He tried to stand up, aggressively grabbing his cheap leather briefcase. This meeting is officially over. We absolutely do not have to sit here and listen to these baseless, highly defamatory criminal accusations without legal counsel present. Come on, Cassandra. We are leaving right now. We will get our own criminal defense lawyer and destroy you. Sit down, Roland. I finally spoke. My voice was low, but it carried across the quiet room like a massive physical blow to the chest. If you take one single step toward that door right now, I will personally hand the police the massive mountain of evidence we have of your extensive wire fraud and the highly illegal offshore LLC you set up in the Cayman Islands to launder my father's money. I have the routing numbers. I have your IP addresses. Sit back down. Roland completely froze in his tracks, looking like a deer caught in high beams. He slowly, shakily sank back into his leather chair, looking absolutely terrified, his breathing ragged. He knew he was completely, inescapably trapped. Mr. Caldwell reached under the table and pulled out a clear, heavily sealed plastic evidence bag. Inside were the 3 brightly colored pills Beatrice had bravely given me in the dark grocery store parking lot months ago, a moment that had completely changed the trajectory of this war. We had these specific pills independently analyzed by a private, state-certified forensic toxicology laboratory, Mr. Caldwell explained, placing the sealed bag directly next to the medical report. They are absolutely not painkillers. They are a highly restricted, incredibly potent antipsychotic medication strictly meant to severely sedate highly aggressive psychiatric patients in maximum security mental institutions. Cassandra, you systematically and intentionally swapped his prescribed, necessary pain medication for these highly dangerous tranquilizers to intentionally induce a state of extreme cognitive fog. You deliberately poisoned your own dying husband to make him legally compliant so you could steal his money. Cassandra opened her mouth to speak, to deny it, but absolutely no words came out. She was hyperventilating, grasping at her throat. She looked frantically at Roland for any kind of help, any kind of defense, but Roland was staring intently at his own shoes, completely refusing to make eye contact with her. We currently possess the sworn, legally notarized, video-recorded testimony of the head housekeeper who directly witnessed the medication tampering on multiple occasions. Mr. Caldwell pressed on, ruthlessly tightening the legal noose. We also possess the comprehensive multi-volume file from a highly licensed private investigator. The investigator has thoroughly documented your entire fraudulent, disgusting romantic relationship with Roland. We know he is absolutely not an old family friend. We know about your secret hotel meetings. We have hundreds of high-definition, time-stamped photographs. We know all about Roland's permanently suspended real estate license and his long, heavily documented criminal history of violently exploiting the elderly in Nevada. To drive the absolute final, world-ending nail into their collective coffin, I reached deep into my suit jacket pocket and pulled out a small, high-tech digital audio recorder. It was the specific, tiny device Clara, the incredibly brave hospice nurse, had secretly hidden in the master bedroom on the exact night my father passed away. I set the volume to maximum, ensuring every crackle of audio would be heard, and pressed play. The audio was slightly muffled by the thick bed sheets, but the cruel, greedy voices were unmistakable. It was Cassandra and Roland, conspiring over a dying man's bed. "He is barely breathing," Cassandra's voice hissed through the small speaker, sounding utterly devoid of any human empathy or warmth. "Did you finalize the massive wire transfer from the main holding account? We need that cash. I got $300,000 out safely before the automated bank security put a temporary hold on it," Roland replied on the recording, his voice thick with unchecked greed. "It is more than enough to get us completely out of the country if things go south with the lawyers. Once the miserable old man finally stops breathing for good, we take the rest of the millions and leave Julian with the massive corporate debt. He will be completely ruined, and we will be sitting on a beach." I hit stop and placed the recorder firmly on the center of the table, letting the silence follow the devastating confession. "That exact recording," Mr. Caldwell said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion, "has already been formally submitted to the district attorney's office this morning at 8 a.m., along with the tampered pills, the private investigator's photographs, and the banking server logs explicitly showing Felix's unauthorized wire transfers for his luxury vehicles. You are not just looking at a massive civil lawsuit for fraud, Cassandra. You are actively facing multiple severe, non-bailable felony charges for elder abuse, grand embezzlement, and criminal conspiracy to commit wire fraud. You are going to prison." Felix looked violently ill, his face turning green. He gripped the heavy edge of the table, his knuckles turning pure white. "Mom? What the hell is he talking about? You swore to me this was foolproof. You promised me. You said the money was already ours. I bought a Lamborghini. I signed the official purchase order. If I do not pay them by tomorrow morning, I am going to federal prison for massive grand theft." Cassandra completely ignored her panicking son. She stared directly at me, her fragile mask of absolute superiority entirely shattered into microscopic dust. She looked incredibly small, pathetic, and utterly defeated. "Why didn't you just stop us earlier?" she whispered, her voice violently trembling, thick, black mascara-stained tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "If you knew all of this for months, why did you let us keep going? Why did you come to the house begging on your knees for money like a pathetic, broken loser? Why did you humiliate yourself?" I leaned forward, looking deeply and mercilessly into the tear-filled eyes of the woman who had intentionally made my father's final days on earth a living, breathing hell. "Because my brilliant father wanted to see exactly who you truly were," I said coldly, offering no comfort, no solace. "He wanted you to feel completely invincible. He wanted you to get so incredibly greedy and so terribly arrogant that you would leave a massive, undeniable trail of criminal evidence a mile wide. We did not just want to legally stop you, Cassandra. We wanted to entirely destroy you. We wanted to make absolutely sure you could never, ever do this to another innocent family again. You foolishly thought you were playing a simple game of chess. My father and I were busy building a steel cage, and you gladly, arrogantly locked yourselves inside." The conference room fell into a state of complete, eerie silence, save for the pathetic, rhythmic sound of Felix actively hyperventilating in his chair. The so-called golden child, the incredibly arrogant parasite who had endlessly mocked me for choosing to be a humble high school teacher, was currently having a full-blown, undeniable panic attack right in front of me, violently struggling to catch his breath. "Now," Mr. Caldwell said briskly, seamlessly bringing the focus back to the official legal proceedings, completely ignoring the emotional breakdown happening across the table. "Let us formally and legally conclude the reading of Harrison's actual last will and testament. It is remarkably brief, entirely straightforward, and requires no further debate." He picked up a single, crisp sheet of white paper with my father's distinct signature scrawled at the bottom. "To my wife, Cassandra, who showed me exactly what her true, malicious nature was in my final days of intense suffering, I officially leave the total sum of $1. To her highly disrespectful son, Felix, who brought absolutely nothing but disrespect, noise, and greed to my home, I officially leave the total sum of $1. And to Roland, who I always knew was an absolute fraud and a petty thief, I officially leave the total sum of $1. The entire remainder of my estate, which currently consists entirely of my personal clothing and a few non-valuable personal effects since the trust currently holds all actual liquid and physical wealth, goes completely and entirely to my loving son, Julian." Mr. Caldwell reached slowly into his tailored suit pocket, pulled out 3 crisp, incredibly clean $1 bills, and placed them precisely on the table with ceremonial perfection, aligning them perfectly. "Here is your total legal inheritance," Mr. Caldwell said, sliding $1 across the polished table to Cassandra, 1 to Felix and 1 to Roland. Cassandra stared blindly at the single paper dollar bill resting directly in front of her like it was highly radioactive material. She did not touch it. Her hands were shaking violently in her lap, her breathing shallow and ragged. I stood up slowly from my leather chair, adjusting my jacket. I reached into my heavy briefcase and pulled out 3 thick, legally stamped, bright yellow envelopes. I walked slowly around the large mahogany table, intentionally letting my footsteps echo loudly in the quiet room, and dropped 1 heavy envelope directly in front of each of them, right on top of their $1 bills. "These are official, court-ordered, legally binding eviction notices," I stated loudly, looking down at them from above, asserting absolute dominance. "Since the primary estate and the guest house legally belong entirely to the trust, which I solely control, you are currently classified by the state as hostile, illegal squatters on my private property. You have exactly 24 hours to pack whatever cheap clothes you brought into my house 2 years ago and leave. If you are still physically on the premises at noon tomorrow, I will have the local sheriff and my highly trained private security team physically drag you out in handcuffs and throw your belongings directly into the street." "You absolutely cannot do this to me," Cassandra sobbed uncontrollably, the fake, practiced tears finally replaced by genuine, terrifying, world-ending panic regarding her immediate future. "I am a grieving widow. I have absolutely nowhere to go. I have absolutely no money in my personal accounts. You have to give me a fair financial settlement. It is the law. You owe me for my time." "I owe you absolutely nothing," I replied, my voice completely devoid of any human sympathy, as cold as ice. "You are extremely lucky I am letting you walk out of this building today as a free woman instead of calling the police to arrest you right now for attempted murder via medication tampering. Take your $1 and get out of my sight before I change my mind and call the detectives waiting downstairs." Felix suddenly jumped up out of his chair, aggressively grabbing my suit jacket arm, his eyes wide with sheer terror. "Bro, please, you have to help me out here. The luxury car dealership. I illegally used the trust account routing number for the massive down payment. If those funds bounce tomorrow morning, they are going to press massive criminal charges against me for wire fraud. Just cover the car, man. Please. It is only $250,000. That is absolutely nothing to you now. You are worth $70 million. Just pay it." I looked down in absolute disgust at his sweaty hand gripping my expensive jacket. Then I looked back up at his desperate, pathetic, crying face, remembering how he had laughed at me in the driveway just weeks ago. "I am absolutely not your brother," I said quietly, dangerously. I forcefully shoved his hand off my arm, making him stumble backward into the table. "And as for the Lamborghini, the The bank officially flagged and canceled that illegal wire transfer at exactly 8 a.m. this morning. The dealership manager is incredibly angry and is already sending a professional repo team to collect the vehicle. I strongly suggest you start walking, Felix. It is going to be a very long, very exhausting trip home on foot. I turned my back on them completely and walked straight out of the conference room. I did not look back. I absolutely did not need to. The chaotic sound of Cassandra breaking down into hysterical, ugly sobs, and Felix violently throwing a heavy wooden chair against the mahogany wall, screaming in frustration, was the absolute most beautiful symphony I had ever heard in my entire life. The immediate aftermath of that meeting was incredibly swift and absolutely brutal. When they finally returned to the estate that afternoon in an Uber, they found the massive iron front gates securely locked and heavily guarded by a top-tier private security firm I had hired that morning. They were escorted inside the house one by one, watched closely by armed guards while they frantically packed their personal belongings into cheap black trash bags, strictly forbidden from touching any jewelry, art, or electronics. Roland, ever the predictable rat fleeing a rapidly sinking ship, did exactly what we fully expected him to do. The very next morning, Cassandra woke up in a cheap, dirty roadside motel on the absolute edge of town to discover that Roland had completely vanished in the middle of the night. He had stolen her expensive designer purse, maxed out her remaining personal credit cards on cash advances, and taken the last $3,000 in cash she had desperately hidden in her suitcase. There is absolutely no honor among thieves, only pure, selfish survival. Felix was officially arrested exactly 3 days later at a cheap diner. The luxury car dealership pressed highly aggressive criminal charges for financial wire fraud, and because he had absolutely no money to hire a decent private defense lawyer, he was assigned a heavily overworked public defender who barely looked at his case file. Last I heard from Mr. Caldwell, Felix took a terrible plea deal to avoid a longer trial and is currently serving a mandatory 3-year sentence in a state penitentiary, spending his days scrubbing toilets in the prison laundry room. As for Cassandra, she desperately tried to file a massive civil lawsuit against me, demanding exorbitant spousal support and half the estate. But every single reputable lawyer in the entire city had heard about the explosive Caldwell meeting. Nobody would take her toxic case. The ironclad trust document, heavily combined with the devastating criminal evidence of her intentionally tampering with his medication, made her entirely legally untouchable. 6 months later, Penelope and I were driving past a massive discount supermarket in a neighboring lower-income town. I casually looked out the passenger window and saw a woman wearing a cheap, poorly fitting polyester uniform pushing a massive, heavy line of shopping carts across the hot, sticky asphalt in the blistering afternoon sun. It was Cassandra. Her expensive blonde hair dye had completely grown out, revealing harsh, neglected, wiry gray roots. Her face looked incredibly worn, deeply exhausted, and incredibly old. Her posture stooped. She looked up briefly, wiping sweat from her forehead with a dirty sleeve, and made direct, undeniable eye contact with me as my car slowly rolled past the parking lot. She immediately looked down at the dirty pavement, utterly humiliated, desperately trying to hide her face behind a row of metal carts. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. Karma is not always swift, but when she finally arrives, she never, ever misses her intended target. A full year has peacefully passed since that explosive, life-changing day in Mr. Caldwell's office, and my entire life has transformed. Penelope and I finally moved back into the main estate. The very first thing we did was hire a highly professional, deep-cleaning crew to violently scrub every single inch of the massive house, effectively removing any lingering physical or emotional trace of Cassandra and her incredibly toxic presence. We threw out all the ugly, cold modern furniture she had bought with my father's money, donating it to charity, and brought back the warm, classic, comforting pieces my beautiful mother had originally chosen. The massive house finally felt like a real home again. It felt like it could actually breathe freely for the first time in 2 incredibly long years. I made absolutely sure to deeply take care of the brave, loyal people who had risked their own personal safety and careers to stand by my father during his absolute darkest hours. I hired Beatrice, our fiercely loyal housekeeper, back on a massive, permanent retainer with a significantly doubled salary. I explicitly told her she only had to work when she wanted to, and I set up a fully funded, multi-million-dollar retirement account for her so she would never, ever have to worry about money, housing, or healthcare again for the rest of her life. She wept when I handed her the paperwork. Clara, the incredibly brave hospice nurse who had secretly recorded the damning confession, was deeply afraid of violent retaliation from Roland's shady contacts. I personally paid off the entire remaining balance of her massive nursing school student loans in one lump sum. Furthermore, I used my father's extensive network to give her a glowing, highly detailed recommendation that helped her secure a highly prestigious, incredibly well-paying position as a head nurse at the absolute best pediatric hospital in the entire state. She is thriving, saving children every single day. I did not quit my modest job as a high school history teacher. I absolutely love teaching. I love shaping young minds and teaching them about the mistakes of the past. But I did use my massive newfound resources to completely change the way I approached the cruel world. My father had left me a massive, unbelievable fortune, but much more importantly, he had left me a profound, undeniable sense of purpose. I slowly realized that what horrifyingly happened to my father happens to thousands of vulnerable, elderly people across the country every single day. They are intentionally isolated, heavily overmedicated, and ruthlessly exploited by the exact people who are legally supposed to be caring for them. It is a silent epidemic. So, I officially partnered with Mr. Caldwell and established the Harrison Chun Legal Foundation. We fully fund a massive, highly aggressive team of top-tier lawyers and seasoned private investigators who specifically take on highly complex cases of elder financial abuse. We provide completely free, world-class legal representation for desperate families who are trying to protect their vulnerable parents from predatory caretakers, manipulative step-parents, and fraudulent financial advisors. We hunt down the predators. We freeze their assets. We put them behind bars where they belong. Every single time our foundation completely wins a major case in court, every time we throw a ruthless predator out onto the street and return stolen, hard-earned assets to a rightful, loving family, I know my father is looking down from heaven and smiling that dangerous, brilliant, victorious smile of his. Yesterday afternoon, I drove alone out to the quiet, peaceful cemetery on the far edge of town. The weather was absolutely perfect, crisp, cool, and incredibly peaceful. I walked slowly up the small green hill and stood silently in front of the beautiful double marble headstone where my mother and father are finally resting together in perfect peace. I placed a fresh, beautiful bouquet of bright yellow roses, my mother's absolute favorite flowers, gently against the polished marble. "We did it, Dad," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion, the cool wind gently rustling the leaves of the massive old oak tree above me. "We completely protected the family. The massive estate is totally safe. Penelope and I are getting married next spring right in Mom's garden. And the foundation is actively saving lives every single day. You were completely right about everything. We just had to patiently wait for the brutal jaws of the trap to finally snap shut." I stood there in the quiet cemetery for a very long time, watching the bright sun slowly set over the rolling green hills, painting the sky in stunning shades of orange, pink, and purple. I thought deeply about the sheer terror and absolute, crushing desperation I had felt 2 years ago, standing helplessly outside the bank when Thorne had frozen my credit cards. I thought about the agonizing, unforgettable pain of watching my brilliant father physically deteriorate while cruel strangers shamelessly looted his life's work right in front of him. But most importantly, I thought about the incredible, undeniable power of extreme patience, the absolute necessity of establishing hard, unforgiving boundaries, and the undeniable universal truth that pure, unadulterated greed will always eventually destroy itself from the inside out. Family is not just about sharing the same blood. True family is about fierce, unconditional protection, unwavering loyalty, and the absolute willingness to stand up and fight a brutal war when the wolves are aggressively scratching at your front door. Cassandra foolishly thought she could manipulate the legal system because she genuinely believed kindness and patience were fatal weaknesses. But she learned the absolute hardest way possible that the most dangerous, unstoppable people in the entire world are good, patient people who have finally been pushed way too far. Have you ever faced something incredibly similar with your own toxic family? Have you ever had to draw a hard, unforgiving line in the sand against someone who thought they could easily manipulate and steal from the vulnerable people you fiercely love? Share your personal story in the comments below, and do not forget to explicitly like and subscribe so you do not miss the next incredible journey. Stay incredibly strong, fiercely protect your peace, and never, ever let anyone make you feel guilty for demanding the absolute justice you completely deserve.